The scream came first. Then the sound that split the air, a single deafening gunshot echoing down the quiet suburban street. When I ran out of the house, the sun was still warm, but the world had already turned cold. My 6-year-old daughter, Emma, was on the asphalt, her blue dress torn, a small teddy bear crushed beneath her. Beside her stood Karen Lawson, the HOA president, still gripping the gun, her yellow vest glowing like warning tape against the calm afternoon sky. For a moment, no one moved. Not the neighbors frozen on their lawns, not the jogger standing halfway down the block, mouth open in shock. The only sound was Emma's soft, broken sob, and the metallic clink of Karen's trembling hand lowering the weapon. She was trespassing, Karen stammered. I didn't mean... It just went off. Her voice cracked, but I barely heard her. All I could see was my daughter's blood trailing onto the pavement, bright against the gray. I knelt beside Emma, my mind still trapped between disbelief and fury. My hands pressed against the wound, but my voice stayed calm, trained, deliberate. Stay with me, sweetheart. Keep your eyes open. When I looked up, Karen's words hit me like static. I didn't know she was your daughter. The sirens were already growing louder, but so was something else inside me, because I wasn't just a father. I was the judge she'd soon be standing before. Before that afternoon, Maplewood Heights was the kind of place that made people believe peace could be bought. Every lawn looked airbrushed, every mailbox painted the same shade of beige. Even the breeze felt rehearsed, carrying the faint scent of roses, asphalt, and chlorine. My wife, Alina, loved it here. She said it reminded her of stability, something our family hadn't known much of while I was climbing the judicial ranks. To Emma, our 6-year-old, the neighborhood was a maze of wonders, swing sets, puppy walks, and chalk drawings on the sidewalk. She was born prematurely, smaller than most, her bones fragile from the start. But she carried an energy that outshone the weight of her past. I worked downtown, presiding over civil court cases, disputes about property, contracts, and corporate negligence. Ironically, I had signed rulings that defined HOA power across the county. I'd seen both sides, homeowners who fought back and boards that acted like miniature governments. That's why when we moved here, I asked Alina to keep our identities private. I wanted a normal life for Emma. Karen Lawson had other plans. She was the HOA president. Polished smile, iron will, voice sharp enough to cut through glass. She introduced herself on day one with a brochure and a warning. We have strict community standards, judge or not, she'd said. We like order here. I remember smiling politely, hiding what I knew. That control is often the last refuge of the powerless. For months, we followed every rule, paid dues on time, kept the grass trimmed, even avoided parking on the street overnight. Still, Karen found ways to assert her presence. An email about toys left visible on the porch, a note taped to our gate about noise levels after 8 p.m., and once, a warning for Emma's small inflatable pool, unapproved outdoor structure. We laughed it off then, because that's what you do when you believe you live among civilized people. But civilization is fragile, and on that warm Saturday afternoon, it took just one paranoid woman, one small misunderstanding, and one trigger pull to prove it. It started like any other Saturday, sunlight falling soft across the cul-de-sac, children's laughter floating through the hedges. Alina was in the kitchen baking muffins. I was reviewing case notes for a Monday hearing. Emma, restless as always had one hand wrapped around her stuffed puppy and the other tugging at the back door. "Can I go play at the park, Daddy?" she asked. "Stay close to the sandbox, okay? And don't talk to strangers." "Not even Miss Karen?" I hesitated. Especially Miss Karen. The HOA playground sat barely 60 yards away, a rectangle of swings, mulch, and perfectly painted benches that Karen treated like her throne. Her obsession with control had reached a fever pitch since a few neighborhood teens had been caught littering. She'd even installed motion sensors, citing community safety. At 2:43 p.m., Emma skipped down the path, her laughter echoing off the fences. Neighbors waved from driveways. Someone turned up their lawnmower's radio. And then, silence. A shout broke the calm, sharp, adult, furious. Through the kitchen window, Alina froze mid-pour. Is that Karen? By the time I reached the door, I could already hear her. Whose child is this? You can't be here without a guardian. This is private HOA property. Emma's small voice floated back, trembling, confused. But it's just the swings. Karen's reply sliced through the air. Don't you talk back to me, young lady. I stepped outside, heart tightening. The late summer air smelled of cut grass and something metallic. Tension, like ozone before lightning. From halfway down the street, I saw them. Karen in her yellow vest, towering over my daughter, hand clenched around a small handgun she kept for patrols. Neighbors had gathered, frozen. Someone shouted, Karen, put that away. But Karen didn't hear reason anymore. She heard defiance. You think you can ignore the rules because your daddy's a judge? She snapped, eyes wild. Emma flinched, hugging her teddy bear closer. I broke into a run. Karen, I yelled. Put the weapon down. And then the world split open. A crack of sound. The smell of gunpowder. The teddy bear fell first. By the time I reached her, the playground was a war zone of silence. Karen's hands trembled. The gun dangled uselessly as she whispered, It was supposed to be a warning shot. But you can't warn innocence. You can only destroy it. The world didn't move after the gun went off. Only sound returned. Sirens in the distance, the shuffle of terrified feet, the choked sobs of a 6-year-old trying to breathe through pain. I remember pressing my hand over the wound in her shoulder, whispering, Look at Daddy, sweetheart. You're going to be okay. Blood was warm against my palm, soaking through my sleeve. Karen stood 3 paces away, eyes wide, still clutching the gun as if letting it go would make the act real. It was an accident, she said. She startled me. Her words floated in the air, thin and meaningless. I could taste iron in my mouth, not from blood, from restraint. Alina fell to her knees beside us, voice breaking as she screamed for the paramedics. I didn't join her. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I simply looked at Karen, the woman who had written letters about unauthorized sprinklers, who had fined old couples for porch lights, who had called power control. And for the first time in my life, I understood why some people confuse law with revenge. When the ambulance doors closed behind my daughter, I turned to the responding officer and spoke in the same tone I used from the bench. Secure the weapon. Detain her until my statement is complete. Karen's face crumpled. You can't do this. No, I said quietly, but the law can. And I am the law. The street was silent, except for the echo of handcuffs locking shut. The same metallic finality she had given my child moments earlier. As the ambulance pulled away, I looked down at the teddy bear lying on the curb, half covered in blood and dust. A symbol of innocence, now evidence. And in that stillness, I promised myself something no judge should ever have to say. Justice would not be blind this time. By the time Emma reached the emergency room, the cameras were already waiting. Someone in the crowd had captured the whole thing. The yellow vest, the swing set, the sound that would haunt this neighborhood forever. The video hit the internet within an hour. HOA president shoots child over playground rule. 2 million views by nightfall. Inside the hospital, the world narrowed to the steady beep of monitors and the soft click of my shoes pacing the linoleum floor. Alina sat by Emma's bedside, clutching her hand, whispering prayers between sobs. The doctors told us the bullet missed her lung by less than an inch. She's lucky, one said quietly. Lucky. That word felt poisonous. Outside the hospital, Maplewood wasn't quiet anymore. Neighbors clashed on social media, some defending Karen as misunderstood, others demanding her arrest. But the truth was simpler. She'd fired a gun at a child. At 9:17 p.m., the police chief called me personally. "Judge Marlowe," he said, voice stiff, "we've detained Karen Lawson. She's claiming self-defense under HOA property statutes." I almost laughed. Property statutes. Even in violence, she was hiding behind paperwork. "She'll need to make that argument in court," I replied. "Yes, sir, but she's asking if you'll be presiding." The irony hit like a punch. The same HOA president who'd fined us for Emma's sandbox would now stand trial in my courtroom for nearly ending her life. That night, I sat alone in my study. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the low whir of the ceiling fan, the kind of domestic peace that now felt foreign. Emma's teddy bear, bagged and labeled evidence, sat on my desk. And for the first time in my career, I questioned the foundation of justice itself. Could I be fair when the law had come for my own child? When dawn came, I already knew the answer. Justice, if it meant anything, had to survive even this. So I put on my robe, walked into the courthouse, and took my seat behind the bench, not as a grieving father, but as the man who would make sure the world saw what real accountability looked like. Courtrooms are built to contain emotion, heavy wood, cold light, and the smell of old paper designed to quiet rage. But that morning, when they brought Karen Lawson in, silence didn't feel like control. It felt like tension coiled to snap. She looked smaller now. No clipboard. No authority. Just a woman in a beige blazer, wrists trembling above a table stacked with defense files. Outside, the press crowded every step of the courthouse. The same reporters who'd once covered her HOA fundraisers, now shouting questions through metal barricades. "Judge Marlowe, can you stay impartial? Do you believe this was an accident?" I said nothing. The law had to speak for me. The prosecutor, a sharp young ADA named Darius Kent, laid out the charges: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and discharge of a firearm on community property. Karen's lawyer, sweating through his collar, tried to frame it as negligent discharge. He argued she had acted out of fear. But fear doesn't load a chamber. Fear doesn't aim. Fear doesn't pull a trigger. Behind the scenes, something bigger was unfolding. In the chaos following the shooting, the police search warrant had uncovered a second firearm in Karen's home. One unregistered. One tied to prior noise complaint patrols. And worse, a USB drive filled with HOA meeting recordings. Hours of her voice unfiltered. They think they can do whatever they want. If the rules don't scare them, the sight of my gun will. When the DA played that clip for me privately, the calm I'd built for years cracked, just a fraction. She hadn't been afraid. She'd been playing God in a gated kingdom. I instructed the prosecution to proceed. Every file, every recording, every HOA message thread she ever sent. We'd lay it bare, not because I wanted vengeance, but because I wanted the world to see how authority without empathy becomes tyranny. That evening, I received a letter from a neighbor named Richard. He'd been on the HOA board until 2 months before the shooting. She kept a list, he wrote. A list of problem families. Yours was at the top. She called your daughter a distraction. We tried to stop her. She threatened us, too. That letter changed everything. It wasn't just a tragedy anymore. It was premeditated obsession hiding behind policy. So I drafted a motion, one no judge should ever have to write, recusing myself publicly from presiding, while remaining the senior judicial advisor to the state investigation. It wasn't weakness. It was power used correctly. And that single choice, stepping back, gave me something far greater than authority. The freedom to tell the truth in full. Once I stepped down from the bench, the mask of neutrality could finally fall, and strategy took its place. I wasn't out for revenge. I was out for precision. Justice, when it's clean, doesn't scream. It builds. Karen's trial became a storm of evidence and scrutiny. The world wanted a villain. I wanted a record. The difference between the two is what separates vengeance from history. I met nightly with Darius Kent, the ADA, in a small conference room under the courthouse. The table was always covered in files, HOA bylaws, neighborhood footage, forensic reports, even past HOA complaint logs. Darius poured black coffee into paper cups, muttering, "It's deeper than one shooting, Judge. She weaponized bureaucracy." He was right. Through subpoenas, they pulled bank statements from the HOA's emergency fund, thousands of dollars unaccounted for, private security expenses, firearm purchases, political donations, all in the name of community enforcement. Every document exposed the same pattern: control disguised as order. But the key was not Karen's corruption. It was her belief. She genuinely thought the HOA outranked the law. That belief would hang her. But not before we used her own words to do it. Darius assembled the timeline. Emails where she bragged about disciplining children, audio recordings of her threatening a single mother for unpaid dues. The moment on video, uncut, unedited, when she fired the shot and said, "Maybe now they'll listen." I didn't sleep much during those weeks. At night, I'd walk into Emma's room, watch the slow rise and fall of her chest under the soft light of her unicorn lamp. A faint scar traced her shoulder now, a reminder that healing doesn't mean forgetting. Alina would whisper, "She's sleeping better," but we both knew we weren't. One night, Emma woke up and asked, "Daddy, is Miss Karen going to jail?" I hesitated, then said softly, "No, sweetheart. She's going to learn what laws are really for." When the day of the trial came, the courtroom was standing room only. National networks set up cameras. Activists filled the benches. And Karen, still defiant, still in her yellow, walked in like she owned the place. But the plan was already in motion. Before the jury ever took their seats, Darius stood and played the first recording. Karen's HOA meeting, the one where she said, "I don't care who her father is. Rules are rules." Then came the second clip, the one she didn't know existed. A neighbor's Ring camera had captured her drawing the gun that day, steady, deliberate. The truth wasn't just going to convict her. It was going to redefine the limits of power, from playgrounds to courtrooms. As the prosecutor's voice echoed through the chamber, I sat in the back row, unseen but present. And for the first time since the shot, I exhaled. Not in relief, but in readiness. This wasn't the end of Karen Lawson. It was the beginning of a new kind of justice, one that didn't ask for belief, only for proof. The second day of trial felt like the entire country had tuned in to watch a reckoning. Every news outlet streamed it live. Headlines screamed, "The HOA trial that split America." But inside the courtroom, it was quiet. Too quiet. Like the air before thunder. Karen Lawson sat at the defendant's table, chin high, yellow blazer pressed perfectly. She still thought she could argue her way through this. Her lawyer spoke with a nervous confidence that cracked at the edges. My client, a civic-minded volunteer, acted in defense of neighborhood safety. She regrettably discharged her weapon in a moment of fear. The prosecutor cut him off. "Let's test that theory." He pressed a button. The monitor lit up. The jury leaned forward. The footage rolled. Karen stepping onto the playground, finger already on the trigger guard, voice sharp, unprovoked. Then came her words, frozen in time, her own voice booming through the speakers. "Maybe now they'll listen." You could feel the air leave the room. Karen's jaw tightened. Her lawyer stammered, That's taken out of context." The prosecutor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Out of context? Let's provide context. Next clip. An HOA meeting recording, her voice again. "If the sight of my gun keeps them quiet, then it's working." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel. "Order." Karen looked around, her face paling. The control she'd clung to for years was slipping through her fingers in front of the world. And then came the witness who sealed her fate. Richard, the former HOA treasurer. He walked to the stand with a folder in hand, voice shaking but clear. "She kept a list," he said, "a blacklist of families she didn't like. She called it the problem file. She bragged about making their lives hell." He placed the folder on the evidence table. Inside were emails, dozens of them, signed by Karen. Fines, threats, violations invented out of thin air. When the prosecutor asked him what broke him, Richard looked directly at Karen. The day she said she'd teach the judge's kids some manners. That's when I quit. Karen's face drained of all color. The gallery gasped. Her lawyer buried his face in his notes. It was over, and she knew it. The prosecutor closed his folder and turned toward her. Ms. Lawson, you built a world where you were the law. Today, the law finally belongs to everyone else. For the first time, Karen's mask cracked. Her lip trembled. Her eyes flicked toward me, sitting in the back of the room. And I didn't look away. I didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't gloat. I simply met her stare and said, quietly enough for only her to read my lips, "Now you listen." That was the moment power changed hands. Not through shouting, not through rage, through silence, the kind that ends tyrannies. By the fourth day, the trial had become less about one woman and more about what happens when authority turns into obsession. The courthouse was overflowing. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder with HOA presidents from across the state, watching what they all secretly feared, accountability. Karen Lawson took the stand at 10:12 a.m. She raised her right hand, her fingers trembling. The oath echoed through the courtroom like a final warning. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," she whispered. Her lawyer tried to paint her as overwhelmed, a woman pushed too far by the stress of leadership. But when the prosecutor approached, his tone was surgical, polite, cold, and devastating. "Ms. Lawson, you claimed the firearm discharged by accident. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Then why did you deactivate the safety 2 minutes before the incident, according to the weapon's forensic log?" Karen froze. Gasps rippled through the gallery. "And why," the prosecutor continued, "did you send this text to a board member the night before the shooting?" He clicked the remote. The text projected on the wall. "That judge thinks his kid's above the rules. Maybe tomorrow she learns we don't play favorites here." The silence that followed wasn't human. It was absolute. Her lawyer stammered, "That was a joke, an exaggeration." "A 6-year-old was shot, counselor," the prosecutor replied. "Nothing about this is a joke." Karen tried to steady herself, but the courtroom lights seemed to grow harsher. Sweat traced the edges of her makeup. Her voice cracked. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted them to respect me." The prosecutor stepped closer. "Respect is earned, Ms. Lawson, not enforced with a bullet." He turned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this wasn't fear. This was ego, with a trigger." Then he looked to the back of the courtroom, right at me. "And this is the consequence of mistaking control for justice." When he sat down, no one breathed. Even the judge, my colleague, a man I'd mentored years ago, paused before speaking. This court has seen negligence. It has seen recklessness, but rarely has it seen cruelty masquerading as order. "The evidence is overwhelming." He turned toward Karen. "You sought to silence a child. Instead, you gave a voice to every person you ever intimidated. The verdict came without delay. Guilty on all counts." Karen's head dropped into her hands as the gavel struck once, a sound so final it felt biblical. The courtroom erupted, not in applause, but in release. Reporters rushed for the doors, cameras flashing. Neighbors wept. And for the first time, Maplewood's silence wasn't fear anymore. It was closure. As they led Karen away in handcuffs, she turned once, just once, toward the back of the courtroom, eyes glassy, voice almost gone. "I wanted order," she whispered. "You created chaos," I said softly. "Now let the law restore balance." And with that, she disappeared down the hall, swallowed by the very system she'd mocked. When the sentencing day arrived, the courtroom was silent before dawn. The world outside buzzed with headlines. The HOA judge's daughter case, order turned to chaos. But inside, it was still almost sacred. Karen Lawson stood before the same bench she had once mocked. Her yellow blazer was gone, replaced by a plain gray jumpsuit. She looked smaller, not just in stature, in spirit. Her eyes, once sharp with arrogance, were now empty windows of someone who had seen the truth too late. The judge, my colleague and friend, adjusted his glasses before reading the verdict aloud. Ms. Lawson, you sought power where you had none. You policed peace and destroyed innocence. Today you will serve a sentence designed not for punishment, but reflection. He paused, letting her squirm in the silence. You will serve 7 years in state prison, followed by 1,000 hours of community service, specifically at the very playground where you took aim at a child. Her mouth fell open. The gallery stirred. You will clean, repair, and maintain that playground. You will rebuild what you destroyed, not with orders, but with your hands. It was quiet again, except for the sound of a single child laughing somewhere outside, faint and distant. Karen's attorney tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. Justice, like childhood, must be protected, dismissed. The gavel struck once. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as officers led her away. The people who once feared her stood and clapped, not in celebration, but in release. A month later, I visited the playground at dusk. The wind carried the faint creak of swings and the scent of rain-soaked grass. Emma sat on the same slide she once loved, a tiny white bandage still on her shoulder, and there, in the distance, wearing an orange vest, scrubbing the fence she had once guarded with fury, was Karen. A guard stood nearby, arms folded, watching as she worked silently. For a moment, she looked up. Our eyes met through the wire fence. I didn't feel anger, just clarity. I nodded once, slowly, and she lowered her gaze, scrubbing harder. Emma tugged at my hand. Daddy, that's her, isn't it? Yes, sweetheart. Is she fixing it? She is. Emma smiled faintly. Then I think it's okay now. The wind picked up again, rattling the chain swings, carrying the sound of forgiveness through the air. That night, as the lights of Maplewood shimmered beyond the trees, I realized something simple and profound. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just restores what was broken, one quiet act at a time. It's strange how quiet justice can be. When the cameras left, when the reporters stopped asking for statements, Maplewood finally sounded like a neighborhood again. Just the hum of sprinklers, the distant bark of a dog, the ordinary heartbeat of life resuming. Emma healed faster than I expected. Children have a way of repairing what adults can't. Her scar, a thin white line along her shoulder, became just another story she'd outgrow. But I didn't heal the same way. Mine was slower, deeper, quieter. For months, I'd replayed every second, her laughter, the scream, the shot. The courtroom. The silence afterward. Each memory was a test. Would I let anger define me or restraint redeem me? And in that reflection, I learned something I'd never understood from the bench. The law doesn't end at punishment. It ends at understanding. When I drove past the playground one evening, the sun had turned the metal slides gold. Karen was gone. Her time served, her name erased from the HOA records, but the benches she'd repainted still stood, her pennants visible in every brushstroke. I realized then that justice isn't about erasing pain. It's about restoring order, so that children can play again, so that silence no longer means fear. That's how Maplewood healed. Not with verdicts. With peace. Some stories burn with outrage. Others end in silence, the kind that feels like truth finally settling into place. What happened in Maplewood wasn't just about laws or punishment. It was about the cost of forgetting empathy and the power of remembering it again. A neighborhood rebuilt itself not through anger, but through one father's choice to let the law, not vengeance, speak. If someone harmed your child's peace, what would you have done? Would you have chosen fury or justice? Tell me in the comments below. And if stories of real justice, quiet power, and emotional truth move you, subscribe for more true justice stories. Because sometimes the calmest voices deliver the loudest verdicts.